Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Duet Reviews. And it's a very special one because we are still celebrating Kevin Kline Appreciation Month here at the Cup. It's March, and we all know what March means. Kevin Kline Appreciation. uh, Funny story about that, just for those who are confused by that. We originally planned the Cyrano de Bergerac and Present Laughter episodes that have since already been posted to be just the only two, and we thought it'd be funny to do them back to back because they were both Kevin Kline. And then we thought, well, what else? What other Kevin Kline theater productions are available online for viewing? And we found a few others, and we've turned it into a whole month. So that's why we're doing this unconventional piece that we'll talk about in a minute. But first, I obviously have to introduce our special guest. She is, to fans of the show, someone who needs no introduction, the general assistant of Cup of Hemlock Theatre and a good friend of the Cup, Jillian Robinson. How are you today?
Hello, I'm very well. How are you?
I can't complain. I'm
Nice.
happy to be talking about this.
I'm very excited to be
But
talking
first,
about
I have
this.
to ask, what is in your cup? And because you usually bring your A game in this department, what is your ensemble?
My ensemble, right. So my ensemble, I'm just kind of going with like an army neutral jacket esque vibe.
Nice.
It's
I
actually
didn't,
my mom's,
yeah.
borrowed it.
I
um,
It's occurring to me that I didn't even like name the production that we are
True.
reviewing here, which yeah,
Look at that.
I
It's
got so
fun.
caught up on Kevin Kline that who's barely even in this, and we'll talk about that, don't you worry. Uh so we are
um,
yeah. Sorry, do you want to
Do
say
you want
your
me?
cup
You know
first?
what? Yeah, let me
Finish
go
your
through my
cup.
ensemble and my cup, and then you can say it, and then it'll be like a mystery
Ooh,
for our
yeah.
viewers.
Who
Yeah.
haven't
So I
looked
have
at the
like
title.
right, true. Neutral army. I don't know, jacket
Nice.
wise. Hair
So,
pulled back because we'll
hmm
talk about it. This is a sweaty,
hmm
grungy performance. So no froofiness happening tonight. And then I'm treating myself to a little nip of my favorite alcohol, amaretto,
nice.
um, on the rocks. And
Mm,
then I have my glass of water too. But
very nice.
now, do you want to maybe say what the production is,
I'll
and then
go through
folks
my
will
cup and outfit, and then since we are keeping them in
great,
suspense anyway,
great.
so I have in my the cup. Hey, that's the show we're on now. It's so meta, very Brechtian that it names what it is
Ah,
right on it. Cup of Hemlock Theatre, where I'm drinking orange pico tea. And since you always bring your ensemble game, I have to justify post hoc why mine was well thought out.
naturally.
So I'm just wearing my Dachshund shirt. I don't know if you can see there's tiny little hot dog dogs on
Yeah,
it, which I will say is relevant to the Dogs of War,
I'm there.
because everybody watching, the production that we are reviewing today to celebrate Mr. Kevin Kline is a 2008 documentary. Yes, we're branching out the cup a little bit, called Theater of War. It is directed by John Walter, and it is documenting the rehearsal process of the New York Public Theater's Central Park production of Mother Courage and Her Children, the Bertolt Brecht play, as it was staged in 2006 from a new adaptation written by Angels of America's own Tony Kushner. And that production was directed by George C. Wolfe, starring Meryl Streep as the titular Mother Courage. And hey, Kevin Kline was in it as the cook.
Yeah.
So there you go. He has top billing in this documentary. So naturally, it's only appropriate to bring it up in the month of March, which again is Kevin Kline Appreciation Month. So that's the lowdown. Interesting. This is, I think, the first time that we're actually on the cup reviewing a documentary. Um, we're
Yeah.
If this is your first episode, any viewers, we usually do pro shots of stage shows and try to treat it almost as if we saw it live in the theater, knowing that hey, COVID makes that impossible.
hmm
But yeah, what did you think? What are your first general thoughts and
Well,
impressions?
what I was gonna say too, to speak to that, I love that we're branching out and
Mm-hmm.
reviewing a doc.
Yeah.
I think it's so apropos of we've been using this digital space to critique and chat about live theater. And as we know, the world is kind of touchwood evolving for the better now that vaccines are kind of being pumped out, and warmer weather is down the pipe. I think the idea of a hybrid space, at least, right, where some live stuff
Mhm.
might be coming back in mixed with digital, I think it's going to make the industry, both film and theater, a very interesting sort of thing
Yeah.
to navigate. So us being on a digital platform reviewing a documentary that followed a live performance,
Mhm.
that also has, old interview clippings of Bertolt Brecht and
Yes.
interviews of novelist et al. All sprinkled in. I like that we're doing
Yeah, like
everything. Anything goes.
something that kind of occurred to me while we were watching it is that like the pro shots format, or the format of the pro shot that we've usually used as the source for our content, is in its own way just a way of documenting live theater. Just like I
Hmm.
think this documentary is essentially trying the same thing, even if it isn't for the express purpose of now you feel like you've seen this show.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think it fits the mandate, we can say, of what
Yes.
the cup
Yes.
tries to
What
do.
the cup wants.
Yeah,
Yeah.
since we're already kind of going down this rabbit hole, I think the first question I'd like to ask, like you, if you have thoughts on this, is
Hmm.
how do you feel that the documentary gave a sense of the actual performance? Or like do you feel like you've seen the production in the absence of an actual pro shot, which I don't believe this production had?
I feel like I'm a little bit biased just right off the get
Mhm.
go because I am a huge fan of Brecht, and I
Mhm.
have read Mother Courage, and so I kind of had that going into it, which definitely fortified my experience. But arguably, I think if you were to come in raw, I find I found that the way that this documentary was filmed, because this is going to be very interesting to kind of like how to talk about it, because like we're talking about the documentary and then also like the performance within the
Yeah.
documentary, so bear with me. But the way the documentary was filmed was brilliant in my opinion, because it had a lot of layers, and it was layered in a way that Brecht would want it layered.
Yes. Oh, trust me, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah. And because of that, because you have many different areas of your brain firing, right? Like you're getting a history lesson from the clippings of Brecht, from Marxism, etc. You're getting like pro shots
Mhm.
of in theater rehearsals and location rehearsals.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like two productions. And then you're kind of getting everyday life sprinkled in too.
Mhm.
And because your brain is being pulled to every one of those outlets, it makes the end, you have that release, or that that impact. You have what Brecht wanted of audience members leaving the theater feeling something, like
Mhm. And
impacted
thinking,
in some way, and
not just
thinking.
feeling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And absolutely, this documentary, and even though we didn't see the full production within
No.
the documentary, it's tattooed on my brain. Like I won't
Yeah.
be able to not see, you know,
Meryl Streep is the definitive Mother Courage in your head.
sure, exactly, or the beautiful imagery of Swiss cheese laid
Mhm.
on the hood of the car, right?
Mhm.
So that's the documentary. So kind of cycling back to the origin of your question of the production itself.
Mhm.
What was it you said?
It
Like,
was, do
does it?
you feel like the documentary was an effective window into the production? Do you feel like you've seen the production
Yeah,
having seen the documentary
I
in a way?
I think so, because what I really liked is they brought the original. They okay, so alongside the Meryl Streep production, they were bringing in photographs of the
Mhm.
like the OG Brecht production.
Ones like this
Um,
that famously grace the cover of
yes,
most copies of the
yes.
play.
So you kind of, either by like a still shot or like a vignette of the piece, you kind of knew what was going on. By the end of it, like you got a Sparks Notes version of what Mother Courage is, like textually, fact wise. But I think tucked away in this documentary, you got the whole morality of the piece, like
Mhm.
the the premise of the piece, the why this piece, why now, was answered without having even to watch the production. And I mean, I guess I would argue most Brecht pieces are like that. Like, I can usually, and again, maybe this is just because I'm like a huge Brecht fan and political theater is my jam, but I can pretty much gauge what the piece is going to be about or where the piece is going within like the first couple beats of exposure to any part of the piece, right? Like whether it be the start, whether it be like a middle scene, when it comes to like Brecht works. Yeah. So I definitely think you get a good stab at what Mother Courage is within this documentary. I don't know, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, it's similar. Like I like how obviously it's incomplete. We're not given like, yep, here's the whole show, but I think it did a very good job of isolating the kind of key defining moments of and like showing them being rehearsed and then showing them on stage and then going back to the original Berliner Ensemble productions and like at least through photographs, if not through actual film footage. And, you know, there's a lot of, I know this might sound kind of sacrilegious to say, but there's a lot of fluff in Mother Courage. I love it. It's a great play, but I don't know if every scene to me always strikes me as necessary to kind of giving you the whole sweep of it. But what, you know, the big three moments are the death of each of her children. Spoilers if you've never read or seen Mother Courage before, but yes, she has three children. And all of them die due to the war that she refuses to, you know, rail against because it is keeping her in business and profitable. And that is the tragic morality tale that, you know, the lesson she never learns. And we got to see all three of those moments in this. And I think so. I would be very curious, and obviously you and I are not the people for this, but someone who's never seen or read Mother Courage, if they could watch this documentary and feel like they got the gist. And if they don't, I think that's okay. It isn't the function of this documentary to be like, now you don't have to read or watch Mother Courage. But yeah, I do think part of the nested story that it wants to tell is the story of Mother Courage in a way. But what I will say, and, you know, I don't know if this is the natural segue into this or if we'll come back to it later, but the Brechtian construction of the documentary, as you kind of already alluded to, I think does Brecht better than Brecht does almost. Like, if you
would say that too, I think.
I agree, but I do think if you just watch a straightforward production of Mother Courage, well, one, not all directors will treat the material equally, and some could do like a very full Stanislavski version that isn't Brechtian at all, aside from the fact that it's written in like with the tenets of epic theater, but that doesn't mean the acting and production necessarily has to abide by that. But yeah, I do think watching Mother Courage just on its own could be very productions variant, how it kind of the extent to which it plays out in a Brechtian way, but watching a documentary quite literally taking us behind the curtain, you know, showing it all in full light.
Like I was gonna say, this is a perfect segue to one of my big thoughts was when you see a Brecht piece or like a Brecht inspired piece, you usually see the theater space, or you, as the audience, you see the scaffolding. You have titles plastered up on a screen. You're very much aware that this is a theater space, and it's even the actors on stage are sometimes nameless, right? And there's a purpose for that. Or so to me, these clippings around the production itself was like we were seeing the scaffolding. Like, and I'll even go, so we'll go as far out as watching the artistic director ride his bike through the streets of New York. So we're not only seeing him do everyday life, but we're also seeing the buildings which he passes. And then like that, his voice talking about Brecht or talking about the production is peppered in on that sort of backdrop. And then to kind of go farther into the rehearsal process itself, we saw their first read. We saw the paper strewn everywhere. We saw the bricks of the building and Meryl actually even says something in the documentary of, we don't
Yeah.
usually like to show our process because
Yeah, I wrote
process
it
isn't
down. The
finished.
quote, she
Yeah,
says,
yeah, yeah.
quote, process looks like bad acting. It's not
Right,
something you should let the people see, which is what the
right.
documentary is precisely doing. It's showing the process.
But it's so Brecht that way. Like it's so stunning that way.
Yeah.
Like and then not only that, and then once we move from the rehearsal space, you know that they're in Central Park. They talk about how there were helicopters flying overhead. It was the heat of the summer, and then you saw like quite often the dock camera pans to the big spotlights and literally the scaffolding that's around the theater space. And you see the director pop on stage and rework things in live time. So it was the documentary, it was like digitally these like the theatrical elements that are just present on a stage as the structure of the piece. Like that's what the doc was doing,
Yeah.
which I
I,
thought was stunning.
I
But yeah.
agree wholeheartedly. Another kind of quotation that I wrote down that I thought was very telling for what we're talking about here is at one point, I think it was like when they were doing their first table read or still doing table work, where the camera pans to a sign on the wall that says, just a reminder, the documentary film crew will be filming the rehearsal. And I'm like, if this isn't Brechtian, I don't know what is. So yeah,
A documentary is a documentary is a
it's a documentary.
documentary.
It's
Like,
not even Brechtian. It's also Gertrude Stein. There you
yeah,
go.
exactly.
But yeah, I do think like, yeah, Brecht is almost the perfect subject to make a documentary about, because it is form and content in dialogue all the
Yeah,
way through. And it's interesting because like we often talk about like documentary aesthetics as being fundamental to epic theater, but like if you think historically about it, Brecht didn't actually engage that much with the documentary aesthetic. That was really like Erwin Piscator was,
yeah,
yeah, for him. Like, and this is actually one of the points of contention, not that they were rivals by any means, but where their two visions of epic theater kind of
right.
vary, is that Piscator was the real epic theater must be documentary theater, and that's why so many of his plays were trial plays that used like court transcripts and showed the
Mm-hmm.
photography on stage. And Brecht was kind of more about, this might sound unbrechtian, but kind of bringing people more into the worlds than sort of
Yeah, or
reminding them.
having bodies on stage create these pictures.
Yeah,
Right? He's
it
all
was.
about yeah.
Yeah, no, good way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but I do think, yeah, it's nice to get some of the Piscatorian epic theater
Yeah,
into the
yeah,
Brechtian world, like show that they
yeah.
can coexist, certainly.
Yeah, and I think what a super resonant moment for me, and it was near the end, which this is another reason why this documentary was beautiful because there's so many pieces at the end that sort of just like was that extra
Mhm.
push to the heart or like triggering of the brain to be thinking of things, right? Is when the two folks are actively taking down the large theater billboard or large theater banner
Yeah,
and hooking up and releasing the Mutter Courage.
yeah. They were taking down the Schiller's Robbers one in front of the Berliner
Right,
Ensemble and putting up the Mother Courage one. Yeah.
right. And then over top of that was the dialogue of it takes, and this is like a Marxist view, but a lot of Brechtian pieces operate this way too. Of it takes the whole sort of tribe or the whole community to make something work or make a piece tick. It has to be a collective that are all working together. Otherwise, like, what is it for?
Mhm.
And I just thought that was, again, that layer of like a camera. The documentary camera is like seeing these two people, we don't know who they are, just workers of the theater,
Yeah.
actively unhinging a sign, putting up the sign, right, and going into like Mother Courage is the next production. They are unraveling the sign together. Anyways, it's just like another layer
Yeah,
of
it's putting the, like, it's showing, the all the labor that goes into theater, including like
Yes.
the manual labor of theater publicity, which we don't
Yeah,
often
and
think
we
about.
and we get an intel into the gentleman who did props.
Yes. Oh,
Like we
I'm
get
gonna
a whole
talk about
kind of,
that.
yeah, a whole kind of like storyline of him. And it just I guess the moral of that little nugget I just talked about is like it's again it's using a Brechtian style to talk about Brecht,
Yeah.
and then like
And,
extracting it
and
like
what I
yeah, sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
Well, what I really liked about the scene you're talking about is because that was at the like the actual in East Berlin, like, Berliner Ensemble Theater was where that scene
Yeah.
took place, and it kind of zoomed back to show the bust of Brecht that's just across the street from it. So it's almost kind of like he's watching on from his,
Yeah.
historical distance in a way. Like, I don't know, with approval, we can anthropomorphize the bust if we want to, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but sort of showing that kind of history lineage that, if you look back far enough, it begins with him in a way.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Um but that I think that's another, I think that's another reason why I love Brecht so much. And a lot of the time you talk about him, he's just chilling with his cigar in like the
Yeah.
second row of the theater, and they talk about like, laughing at high intensity moments.
Yeah.
Even like he just like he got something. Like he got like the humanity of art and like the humanity of the world before he wrote his plays. And I think him having that kind of on his tool belt, or that being like the main hat he wore, the pieces are just stunning and unlike any other playwright. Because it's funny, even like the whole thing of like his bust is watching over. I feel like he'd just be chilling there with his cigar, and be like, "Yeah, of course
Well,
they're putting up."
and it's
Like,
interesting because thinking in light of what you're saying, thinking back to that scene, the bust is actually on profile. It's not like staring at the workers. It's not like
right,
he's
right,
really watching on. He is kind of just
exactly,
doing his own thing off to the side. But
exactly,
yeah, I don't know
exactly.
if that is necessarily what the cinematography is trying to communicate one way or the other, but it is, yeah, it's open to either reading, and I do like that
Yeah,
about it.
yeah.
Yeah.
It was hard to debate. It was hard to like debate him in a way, because even you see in if you watch the documentary, you see in the interview session when he was living in the States, of they basically like put him under trial or
Yeah, the
interrogated him of
QA.
his exactly. And he played his cards right.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
he
he was
just
acting was the big point of that scene, is
well,
communicating that
totally. And
everything was theater for him.
even his, he had a family to think about, but his whole idea of navigating the globe, right? Knowing when to leave,
Yeah.
knowing when to kind of like sit back and puff
Yeah.
your cigar,
Not
knowing when to like create a certain image, knowing when to, he just knew, yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like, yeah, it's something that I do think is worth acknowledging. We don't need to dwell on it, but as much of a genius as Brecht was, and certainly a huge innovator as far as Western theater tradition goes, we have to, he doesn't come to us in a vacuum in a way. He kind of took a lot of influence from Eastern theater traditions, especially Chinese theater, where
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff has been, for centuries been mainstays. A lot of the things that we credit Brecht as innovating Western theater with, there is a bit of a dimension of cultural appropriation to that.
Yeah.
He also, he is certainly, we do think of him as a singular visionary, but he had a lot of very talented collaborators, many of which probably did have play larger hands in writing his plays than are often given credit for, especially his female collaborators, including his
Yes.
wife and various other women that he was probably sleeping with. Like, that was just he was kind of a sleaze in certain ways.
Yeah,
And
polygamy was his jam.
yeah, and like, various testimonies have been like, lost to history to kind of know how he necessarily treated all the women in
Yeah,
his life.
yeah, yeah.
So like, we're not gonna just, uncritically,
No,
I just, because we have been
Yeah.
doing a lot of high praise, rightly so, but let's just kind of acknowledge
Yeah,
that there's a shadier
I
side
will,
to him.
I will say I say Brecht because I think like his name has become like the term for this type of theater.
Brechtian, yeah. He's an
yes,
adjective.
Exactly. It's the theory and like theater for political purposes, basically, is what I jazzed about.
Yeah.
And he just seems to be, he just is a pioneer in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or one of them. But yeah, I don't really care much for him as a person per
Yes, and
se,
we can
but
separate the man from the adjective that bears his name.
yes. Yeah.
Cool. Didn't want to dwell on that, but felt like it
No, no,
was
no.
worth
I'm glad
acknowledging.
I was gonna bring it up eventually, so I'm glad you found a way
Yeah,
to kind of
let's just not get too far in
put it
the
out there.
uncritical praise before.
Yes.
But getting back to the production, let's talk about this cast. Like, let's. So we'll get to Meryl Streep in a second, but since it is Kevin Kline Appreciation Month,
Right.
Kevin Kline, for his top billing in this, kind of really wasn't in it that much. Yeah, which, anyway, we're watching it. We watched it. We're still going to review it in this most sacred of months, but still, yeah, I was a little disappointed that he played the cook in the production. So obviously he would have been in that a lot, but he was only kind of like prominently featured in maybe 2 or 3 scenes in the actual documentary. I don't know if you had any thoughts about his presence or performance.
I kind of liked that Meryl was the only like actor voice we got.
Or at least the most prominent, yeah.
Yeah, and like I liked that it was from Mother Courage herself, and that it was a female's voice. Like a lot of the other interviewers just happened to be male, right? So it was just nice to get like a perspective from her. I mean, everyone wants perspective from Meryl Streep, but
Of course, she's great.
yeah. The thing that I loved about the stuff that they like the footage they used for Kevin Kline more than they did for Meryl, because I think when they segued back to like Meryl's parts, it was very much like plot for the documentary audience, right? It was like, let's show this scene so that we kind of know what we're talking about. With Kevin, the scenes they chose to use for him, they were the ones you were kind of stimulated to think a little bit more with. So the one that I definitely want to talk about, and you probably wrote this down too, but he has a speech as the cook that's like a very serious, I won't really get super far into the content because really it's the style that I want to chat about, but he has this he delivers the speech in a way that is like, okay, there's no fourth wall. I'm telling you the trials and tribulations of war and how it sucks and life sucks and I'm here and we're all here and what does it all mean? What is it all for? Like basically one of the thesis statements like of the piece.
Yeah.
And then he caps off this very like firm, just conversational delivering of text with a
yeah.
And it's like, yes, because so many things happen with that, because you're acknowledging there's the layer of theater. You're acknowledging that this is a piece, and like we're saying what we're saying, but it's in the shell of theater. It's kind of back to what like, you're watching the show, but you're seeing the scaffolding. Like there's always like, so him doing that was triggered instantly. And then it was just like, it was the stark shift from evil and goodness, from sadness and laughter, right? It got into like the psyche a little bit of how can you say all those truths and literally stick a dagger in and then just laugh it off, or like, and how I sort of read that moment of Kline's, everyone else is going to have a different interpretation of it, or like a different feeling from it. And that's what makes Brechtian pieces, or I guess broader scope political pieces, more like broad stroke, but yet like all encompassing, but yet like putting a message forth. I'm going on a tangent. So
that's fine.
Because we're talking about Kline, but he's just a brilliant actor, and in literally like 30 seconds of the documentary, I got all of this from that. So
yeah, so if I can sort of jump onto this, like,
go.
Definitely, like everything you're saying is spot on, and I think it's not even so much that like political theater or just theater in general creates emotion, or that it attaches emotion to things that would otherwise be abstract, like getting to what you were saying about the it's more impactful to hear Kevin Kline in character talking about war than your congressman would be, because that, even though obviously the latter has more of a tangible impact on society and they're the one making actually voting to send young men to war, or young people to war, it's kind of like, yeah, we should care more about that, but it's usually presented in ways that are like, very dry, and usually probably by design to kind of get people to check out and not be as politically
Yeah.
involved. But then when you put it in the voice of such a talented actor in like a very, engaging, dynamic, almost circus like context as this performance does, it gets you. Like, people always talk about how, or people sort of misunderstand Brecht or misinterpret Brecht to think he just wanted you to think, he didn't want you to feel anything. Feeling was bad. But no, I think, and they talk about this a bit in the doc too, but it is a healthy mixture of the two. It's just, he
Yeah.
didn't want you to unplug your brain, which a lot of very high emotional pieces were, at least at his time, designed to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if it was just appealing to the intellect, it wouldn't have the same punch. Like,
Right.
yeah, to Kevin Kline's performance in particular, obviously he's great. We have a whole month about him. But yeah, no, he is fantastic at that moment. It's something, since he really doesn't get a lot of screen time in this, I like that one of his other prominent scenes is having his costume fitting.
Yeah.
and I think, because like we talked about the sort of Brechtian construction of the doc to kind of show the, how things get made. So then when you see him not in character, just as himself, and then the contrast to the way he behaves on stage, and hey, he's wearing the costume that, like, it's the scarf that the costume designer put around him. Like, you notice things that you probably would have just completely gone over your head before. Like, and yeah, he is almost like you could have done it with any actor, but because he is very much I was going to say chameleon, but like, I don't even think that's right. He's very much himself, like, in so much of what he does. And I think his portrayal of the cook here is no exception. But yeah, he becomes his roles, even if you always see him doing it. And that in a way makes him very, like, works well in a Brechtian space as well.
Right.
Yeah. He's good in everything. Let's not be surprised by that. But do you want to talk about Meryl Streep now, the real star of the show?
Yeah.
What did you think of her performance?
I thought her. It's interesting seeing her in the process of, the sweat and grit of the performance, and hearing her in hearing her answers in the interview sessions as Meryl, because I think so often we see her in her big roles that she kicks out of the park, is what I was saying, and how it's just kind of cool to see elements of the real Meryl potentially, right? And I was shocked by somehow sort of blunt and honest her answers were. Honest, but also like spoken with such wisdom that I'm like, we are not worthy of Meryl Streep. Shocked in a good way, though. Because I think the way, the scope we kind of get through Meryl, or she's kind of a vehicle in this doc of exactly like what we're talking about, how Brecht's actors just kind of like do the part. Like, they just, it isn't like this big, grandiose, stunning performance. Like, it's like you are there to do the part, to tell the story, and to put in the work, right? And then everything just kind of comes after that, and we see that in her final in the production. She talks about this. They do a really good job of going to the actual moment on stage when she's over Katrine's body, and it's the last child that Mother Courage loses, and it's in that moment, and in that moment only, that there is a kind of a halting that happens with Mother Courage, where there's a moment of like, and Meryl says this in her interview, that in that moment is when she's a mother. Like, she's actually a mother.
Yeah. And that's what drew her to the show. That's why she wanted to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was, I wrote it down. It was like, she says, like, she's only a mother at the end, and asking why. What for? And she makes reference back to the Czech city or village that she was in, where a church built upon a bunch of bones from battles, and they segue back to the imagery of the bones, and she's like, why, what for, what, to be all bones in a landscape? Like, she kind of just throws it out there, throws a perspective, right? Like, things kind of get thrown into perspective. And it's an act of humanity. Like, I think that's what it is. Like, that's what it is. Like, Brechtian actors, like, they have to be themselves. They have to be humans at the core. They're not these like grandiose actors to do my part, or they're just humans, and think that way first, and then the art comes. So I got a lot of that through her honesty, and both in the rehearsal process and in the interview, and I loved the scenes where she was sort of pounding through the music with the music director and actively highlighting her lines in the thing. So we got to see the blueprint of Meryl Streep. We got to see her process to then be, because she's just human at the end of the day, right? Like, and that's what, honestly, like, cat's out of the bag, newsflash, that's what makes her one of the best actors of our time, is because she is genuinely herself. And again, like, I would love to be where Meryl is one day, but that is a mantra of mine as an artist, is like, you have to be the human first before you are the actor, before you are the director, before you are, and everything else will follow, but you have to be your true self. And that's hard. It's hard, but that's what, Mother Courage at the very end. She is a mother. That's her only identity in that moment. So again, tangent. I get like this with Brecht, though. Sorry, viewers. My brain gets way too jazzed, and I start talking every angle around everything, and I'm thinking. So thanks, Brecht, for making me think.
I'm
Back
sure
to you, Ryan.
No, okay. I don't even know how much more there is to add, to all of your insightful...
I'm stealing this duet review. It's just becoming Ryan making face while Jill talks.
Making good faces to anyone who's listening to this months later on the podcast and can't see me. They're all good faces.
Right.
But yeah, like, it's interesting because Meryl Streep, like, I think whether it's accurate or not, a lot of people do associate her with method acting. Like, I don't know, correct me if you know otherwise, but I think she like trained at the Actors Studio and has that kind of like Lee Strasberg type of American method sort of upbringing in her, sort of. It's okay. We don't need to look it up. Meryl, if you're watching and we got it wrong, correct us in the comments. Big fan. But if that is in fact, whether that is, her actual training, I think it is an association that people tend to have with her. Like, wow, she becomes her character so much of her early career. She became very famous for just her accent work and being so good at putting on the voice of someone. It's sort of foreign to her. And I think it's tempting to think, oh, well, that won't gel very well with Brecht because, they're, antithetical to each other. That's like everything you're saying about being yourself. And, you alluded to this a bit, but Brechtian actors, at least as Brecht envisioned them, they're telling the story of the street scene. I witnessed an accident. Let me tell you about it. They don't become the driver of the car that was in the accident. And it's kind of hard to picture Meryl Streep not becoming her character because that's what she does so well. But I think the way you put it here, you sort of hit the nail on the head. It's not that she, well, maybe not across the board, but it's not that she becomes her characters always, is that her characters become her in a way that she's herself first. Yes. And I think that is why, her portrayal of Mother Courage here is just very stunning. And it doesn't feel like, untrue to the Brechtian, vision of theater, like it.
Absolutely.
And not because it seems fake per se, but it does feel like she's telling you the story more so than she has become Mother Courage.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What I like too about, this is, it's kind of a tangent, but it's using Meryl as a case study. Sure. Brecht has, because you are kind of just to tell the story, and you can get a bit messy with, okay, messy meaning like, you're not watching a Hamlet, or you're not watching an R&J, or I'm using all Shakespeare examples. You're not watching a piece where it's like, oh, this is the character. I'm supposed, like, this Hamlet, I'm there's high expectations, because like, there's no like, oh, I'm watching this Swiss cheese, better mark up to it the Swiss cheese that I saw in last production. Like, that's not the point, right?
Because they're not really characters. They are like medieval allegories.
Yes. And that's what I love. I love that type of theater, for the sheer fact of that the actor has so much more of a playground, and like no comparisons. And even if there was a comparison, you're not supposed to compare. Yeah. It's like, a lot of Brecht pieces are like placed in different time periods, different eras, because they're speaking to, using the same message, the same moral, but speaking to something else, right? Because it's like, technically they can be seen as like agitprop, right? Like agitational propaganda. But that's what I love. Like, and we saw this in the doc of Meryl was delivering a line, and she actually had, I mean, she's Meryl, so she probably does this all the time with all of her texts, but like, she like said a line and then said it again and then said it again, and just like took her time to be like, that didn't fit. This is how I'm saying the line. And it was just like, people just kind of went with it. I mean, mind you, they might have, looking back at the documentary, might have like snipped things together to make that be a thing. But you can just tell that there isn't anything that the actor's putting on. Like, here are the words, say the words as you would say them, like, there's no verse that's in your pattern of how it's said, or like a staging element of how it's usually done. You just kind of, I mean, there's the cart that Mother Courage has, which is usually a consistent prop set piece, but yeah, anyways, tiny side tangent.
But no, it's you're bringing up a lot of great points, because I think, yeah, you're right. We definitely don't say, oh, there's a definitive performance of Swiss cheese at all. Like, but I do think, while there are very few people who saw it are still alive today, we do think there is the definitive actress who played Mother Courage, and that is Helena Weigel, Brecht's wife, who we see her still on the cover of our of our book versions of it today. But yeah, like, none of us can really, even though we saw photos of her and maybe some brief film strips in this documentary, it wasn't set up as like a comparison of how is Streep gonna compare or live up to.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I do think the fact that, I used the term medieval allegories before, but yeah, they're not really like human characters. They represent ideas and coming into conflict with each other, and that is why they are sort of perfect vessels for whatever the actor themselves brings to it.
Yeah.
And speaking...
Vessels, sorry, that's a good word. That's a good word to highlight. A lot of Brecht's characters are just vessels to kind of go into.
And speaking of medievalism, this adaptation was written by Tony Kushner.
Yes.
Who he had in his little self-introduction in the documentary. He talked about how he majored in medieval literature at Columbia, which I didn't realize. But it kind of makes sense when you think about his body of work, that is something he would totally be into. Right. What I know, because we haven't seen the whole production, it's kind of hard to get a full taste of his adaptation, but we certainly got a flavor for it. What did you think of his work here as the adapter?
Yeah, I this is the one part of the doc that I kind of wish we did see more of the production, because knowing like Kushner, and I'm a huge fan of Angels in America as well, I would have loved to see more of his nice prop. I got
all my props.
More of his like allegorical approach, right, to the text, and then also his directors like bringing that to the piece. Like, I loved the imagery we saw of Swiss cheese, like laid upon the
Jeep,
the Jeep, which is a vehicle of war, right, and how he's kind of laid sort of like crucifixional-esque wise. That's not a word, but
crucifixional-esque wise. I like it.
Brecht didn't write formal essays, so there you go. I'm making up a word. Uh, yeah, so I wish we would have seen more of the production to kind of hopefully see a bit more of the like allegorical flavor that I know Kushner's piece would have. I loved hearing him speak, though.
Yeah.
It was really cool to have his voice peppered in throughout. And a lot of what he was saying, again, of just being like a true human. Everyone else that was interviewed kind of was just like speaking their truth and speaking why this piece was so special to them, and you know, him particularly of how he was in conversation with Meryl when they were doing the Angels in America series.
Yeah, the HBO miniseries, yeah.
Yeah, and instantly that was just kind of, and you could tell it's because they're like souls connected, right? They're two of those people that I'm like, I would say the exact same thing I said with Streep, with Kushner, of like, he just is genuinely like a true human. Like his pieces come from the core. So yeah, so I wish we would have seen a little bit more of the production to kind of close read it a bit more, like dramaturgically analyze it a bit more. But yeah, what were you?
Well, he said something interesting in one of his interview segments, and I think this is what he said is pretty much the case with any time you get like a contemporary celebrity playwright to write a new English version of an old play, which is a very common phenomena, especially in like big budget Broadway and West End theater. But yeah, he said that, you know, the hardest part of writing a play is constructing the story and having it unfold. So this is kind of like a playwright's dream to just have Brecht solve that for me already. And my job is to just make the I think he said, I might be misquoting him, but make the language sizzle is how he put it. And yeah, and I think that is very much whether it's always successful or not, that is the idea behind getting these celebrity playwrights to write these new adaptations or English versions of various works, to just, we have pre-existing translations of Mother Courage, we have John Willett, we have Eric Bentley, but those are at least 50 years old, like, give or take. So.
Like, and I think it helps to have that extra lens, right? Like, not only are we getting a Brecht piece resurfaced, but it's resurfaced through the eyes and words of Kushner. And those, like, you know, totally different times of life, but both very influential, impactful writers. Yeah. And
very Brechtian writers, because Angels in America is so Brechtian. Like,
I'm a broken record on these Cup episodes, but you know, another huge thing for me as an artist is resurfacing old works in a modern light, and then you know, using that process to either like change the text or analyze the text, learn from the text. And so, you know, to have like Brecht resurfaced and navigated by Kushner is like, okay, well, this is just like a double blessing, because now I'm extra on board with what this message is going to be.
Yeah. I wonder, and it's hard for me to tell this because of just how little of the actual production we got to see in the doc, but like, I wonder how much of why this play resonated in its time, like the, you know, classic dramaturgy question of why this play now, like they answer that in the doc. It's because the war in Iraq had just was underway, and you know, this quintessential anti-war play will clearly speak to us now, like in this moment of you know, continued, like, you know, mindless conflict with very little gain and losing so much in the name of capital, like and so like the parallels, I think, between, you know, early aughts America and you know, Brecht's Germany, like, are very clear just on the face of it. So I do wonder how much of like Kushner's intervention as playwright really brings that through, or how much is it just like a very clever programming choice, like from the artistic director's perspective. And I don't know, I don't want to sell Kushner short. Obviously he's a brilliant writer, and I do think based on the excerpts we heard, he certainly made the language sizzle. I just like, there's obvious like kind of hacky things that a playwright can do. And I'm not saying Kushner did this, where you can have, you know, the chaplain say a line like they're trying to take away our freedom, things that'll obviously like echo in the ears of you know, early 21st century Americans in their context, but those usually kind of, you know, a little too on the nose for my taste. But yeah, I don't know, do you have a thought?
With Brecht pieces, I feel like those would be difficult to adapt, more so arguably than any other playwright or genre theorist, because like his pieces already are kind of timeless. Like
his Brecht's, right? Yeah, just
yes, okay, like Bertolt Brecht's like original writings have like a timeless quality to them, because it's not like it's not like a story, it's not like a particular setting. Like he wrote them purposely to be neutral in that way. Like, you know, we're in a certain location, we're talking about something, but it is universal in a sense that like this play could be done overseas and it would be completely revered in some shape or form. So I think that makes a modern adapter's job almost harder, because the piece is already it can already quite like speak to folks in a way already. It's just, I guess, them going in and tweaking, how would I say this, like how, like, and adding another layer of like, is there a way that this can be more on the nose, or is there a way that this conversation, you know, we can make it like site specific to like pack a bigger political punch? Because I think with adapting Brecht pieces especially is like you have to be very aware of what historically and politically is happening in the now. Because I think if you don't address that in some shape or form, you're doing a disservice to his pieces.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the reason why he wrote them with such a neutrality and such a universal sense. He wanted them to be done till the dawn of time and be worked and sort of paved a way that speaks to the audience of now. Right? Because the audience need to be thinking. And if you're...
the interesting thing that comes to my mind based on things you're saying is I would like to think that Brecht wouldn't want his plays to be timeless, not out of like a fault in his construction, just because I think nothing would make him happier than eventually society progressing to a point where Mother Courage doesn't resonate with us anymore. And the fact that it still does is troubling and would probably trouble him. Like just coming out of World War II, writing a play about the 30 Years' War, which is hundreds of years before his own time. He's kind of drawing his audience's attention to the fact that we haven't learned our lessons from history. And I agree, it is sadly timeless and prescient to do Mother Courage in 2006 or even 2021. Like, and, you know, but I would like to think that, you know, something that, you know, I feel like an argument that can be made against political theater of this kind, certainly not one I'm making, but is that, well, when has a production of Mother Courage ever ended a war? And it hasn't. It just reminds us of the fact that, but, you know. Go ahead.
No, like I totally get what you're saying about Brecht, you know, kind of wanting his pieces to fizzle out. I honestly think it's a bit of a down, how do I say this? Like it's a testament to mirror us, like mere artists of like, you know, we work with what we have before we create and discover what we must, or like what we can. And so I think like, you know, using a Brecht piece as sort of like, you know, with a modern lens as a catalyst to something greater, whether that be like a progressive political, you know, or like a progressive political advancement, or like inspiring a piece to be written. Because like I know some of my best writing as an artist or an industry worker is me being invigorated by something Brechtian.
Yeah.
Like every time I go back, it's like it just fuels me as the artist to write and create something new. So again, that's a very like new agey utopic way of talking about that, but
I think Brecht had a utopic streak to him, though. I didn't like, and that's why I think he would be displeased to hear that in 2006 history is repeating once again. And like, it's unfortunate that his works are still as relevant and prescient as they were back when he wrote them.
But I mean, on the bright side, and great news is pretty much like almost everything you see made nowadays has some sort of element of Brecht. I mean, because of the times we live in, like rightfully so, and thankfully so, we live in a very politically invigorating age.
In a very self-aware age, I would say.
Very self-aware. Many voices are now being heard that haven't been in the past. And, you know, because, like I said, because Brecht is a pioneer in political pieces, his elements or styles are just like unbeknownst to the artists making the art are trickled into pieces, right? You can I would like you could I would argue you could see something done nowadays and be like, okay, that there's a Brechtian element of that, like tell me there's not, right? So I mean, I would like to think Brecht thinks that's a good thing.
Well, yeah, I don't think he would object to us continuing to keep his aesthetics alive, and because I don't think he would want us to say, "Good news, we solved war and capitalism, and now we can go back to unplugging our minds and not thinking about things," because that's how you wind up back in this. But it is unfortunate that we haven't even gotten to the point yet where that's an option. Not that it's a desirable option, but I don't know. What can you do?
It's funny because like a lot of Brechtian pieces aren't done very often.
Yes and no, I would say, but
like I think a lot like my theater program the year above me did Caucasian chalk circle, and I know Sheridan College at one point did Three Penny Opera semi recently. But it's just, I don't know. I don't see it. It's not really like theoretically it's a staple in theater school, but practically it's not really done.
If we're talking about theater school, it's very important to learn about Brecht to understand the trajectory of Western theater history. And you can't have an intelligent conversation about Carol Churchill or David Grieg without contextualizing them as, descendants of Brecht. So and
two of my favorite playwrights, but sorry, continue.
Shocker. But I do think when I was in my undergrad, one of the third year acting class did Resistible Rise of Arturo Ui, which is another really good one. I feel like certainly theater schools, probably more so than like big mainstream theater companies, have more of an invested interest in doing Brecht because what's the best way to learn about this or that style or theory is let's do a Brecht play.
And I think one of the points to talk about that, unfortunate points, is from a commercial financial point of view, theater is still very much seen as a night out on the town to unplug from your life and be entertained. And if you dare to do a Brecht, you are making a statement. Usually the pieces make statements. Both statements, right? They show both sides of the story, but you are doing a political piece, and I think some companies don't want that on their bill.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That said, if we are kind of interestingly talking about the descendants of Brecht, the contemporary musical, I think, owes a lot to Brecht, which is interesting because we tend to think of that genre as, the epitome of unplug your brain, fluffy bourgeois entertainment, which certainly, I don't know if he would come to the same assessment. He very well might. But so much of musical theater aesthetics, and obviously Brecht had a very fruitful collaboration with Kurt Weill and a lot of very talented composers who, like, so many of his works were operas, like Three Penny Opera, like Rise and Fall of the City of Mahagoni. Like, yeah, like I I think you are right in that, in the comment you made earlier about how there's so much of Brecht and so much of what we consume, even if it isn't necessarily a Brecht play, or
Yeah.
and that's certainly
Definitely elements of Hamilton the musical or
oh yeah,
Brechtian,
well,
for like literally that whole piece is Brechtian. Like,
yeah.
um,
And like most
that's the
musicals
thing.
are, I'd be hard pressed to think of a musical that isn't.
You'll
in
find
some way.
yourself now being like, wait, was that Brechtian? Like, it probably was, or at least elements or styles of it probably was.
But just the fact
Yeah.
that everyone's singing like that,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
that is, it's a non-realist kind of makes you,
Yeah.
you know, you can just get swept up in the emotion about it, but you kind of do have to think about, oh, what is being communicated this way that just simple
Yep.
speech doesn't, and that's why there's so much singing in Brecht's plays.
Yep.
And I did like getting back to this production, or the production documented
Yes.
in the doc. Janine Tesori was the musical director for it, of, you know, Shrek the Musical and Fun Home fame. And yeah, like it's kind of just nice seeing other sort of noteworthy theater talent. Like this is an A team that they got together for this, like all these like people at the top of their careers working at the top of their game. George C. Wolfe who directed it. I believe he directed the premiere production of Angels in America, but he kind of very talented director, playwright. He wrote The Color Museum, one of his most famous plays. He recently directed the film adaptation of Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, the August Wilson play, with the final on-screen performance of Chadwick Boseman. Like, R.I.P.
Yeah, it's on my list.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's on Netflix. Cool. Highly recommend it to anyone watching this. Like, if you like August Wilson, it's classic Wilson. Like,
yes.
Yeah, so I think we've gone on several tangents here. But what a team, I will say, that they compiled for this. I have one last big thought or comment. I don't know how many more you still have.
Can I just like random? Sorry, I
Please.
just got a nerdy dramaturgical moment. And viewers, you know this happens to me often. I just got to say it. It's kind of random, but the final image we get is of the bones, right? That like you see at the beginning or close to the beginning of the doc, that Meryl talks about being underneath this church and how it's like bones from a battlefield, but it's like human skulls, and then but then we're left with that image, and it's just like the bare bones, and then it like also like the bones are the structure of the human body. Like without our bones, we would not be here. And sorry, that's a really
it's
tiny dramaturgical factoid.
Like,
that
my
brain exploded.
It is a potent image, because it's interesting, because when Meryl first mentions it out visiting this small town in the Czech Republic, and like you kind of don't know where she's going with it at first, and then the doc kind of moves on to something else, and that's kind of when it comes back at the end. It sort of brings us full circle in this way. And like, yeah, I agree with your symbolic analysis of this about the bare bones, but it's also just very simply, think of Yorick's skull. It is the memento mori, is that we are all gonna die. But when it's one thing to just find one skull in a graveyard, as the grave diggers in Hamlet do, who I believe you've played.
I did play the grave digger. Yes, another Kevin Kline-esque role.
I would love to see Kevin Kline play the grave digger.
Right?
So good.
But
it's one thing to just be like, yep, we're at a cemetery, there are bones here, look, it's a dead person. But like that image of like the catacombs of skulls upon skulls, she compared it to the very famous images of the killing fields in Cambodia, like after the Khmer Rouge regime. Like, and that's not just the way of all flesh, natural, we are all gonna die. This is humans did this to humans, and it is the horror of war that Brecht is trying to comment on with Mother Courage, that Kushner and company are trying to comment on by putting forward this production. And she brings it up again in the context of her, the why moment of losing your final child, and just the exasperation and how can this keep happening. And even though Mother Courage doesn't learn the lesson, Meryl certainly learns the lesson, and hopefully the audience does too.
Right. See, love that. You're able to expand on... I'm known to do that. Just like pop a little nugget of something and then big old discussion expansion. Sorry.
Love it. Uh, so I
Back to
do,
the show.
yeah. Well, this is all the show we're talking
I know,
about.
I know.
I do have one kind of final thought. We feel like we're probably going over time, but like
Yes.
whatever.
Yeah.
There's so
It's
much juicy.
epic. We're doing
It's
an
epic.
epic
It is
episode for
epic in
epic theater.
scale. Yeah. So I want to talk about there's you alluded to this briefly earlier that there's kind of like Brecht, there's these like scene titles given to the various chapters of this documentary. It's divided into 5 acts.
Yep.
I wrote down the titles here. Act 1 was theater. Act 2 was Marx and Coke, or Marxism and Coke.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll come back to that in just a second. Act 3 was war stories. Act 4 was In Search of Bertolt Brecht. And Act 5 was The Triumph of Death. But so, yeah, we kind of have this sort of neatish division, even though like certain elements of each kind of come back into the part 1. Theater was all about just like, this is the production. Why are we doing this? Mother courage, et cetera, et cetera. Hey, look at all the talented people here. Part 2 was all about the Marxism that inspired Brecht and kind of applying that analysis to the show itself. And I'll come back to this in just a second. Let's finish walking through. Part 3, war stories, was all about just like, what does this mean for war? And it was kind of like getting into a lot of what was going on in Brecht's time in the original production, what's going on now, understanding, meditations on war, relationships to like between Iraq and Vietnam are very palpable. Yep. Then In Search of Bertolt Brecht, this one to me felt like a bit of a tangent in a way. It was very useful and informative, but this was like and now here's a little mini Brecht bio in this.
Right.
And it didn't...
documentary within a documentary.
Yes. And like it was good and informative, and there was a lot of interesting stuff. There was an interview with his daughter Barbara. There was showing his HUAC hearing and kind of talking about how that was him turning life into theater, where he was kind of pulling a fast one on old McCarthy in a way. But yeah, it was very good, but kind of to me felt like a bit of a digression, as interesting as it was. And then the final one, why I would call it the climax, the triumph of death, is okay, and pulling all the threads together and what have we learned from this experience in a way. But the one I really want to talk about is Marx and Coke, Act 2. And I don't have a lot of thoughts about the Coke. Jay Cantor, the professor who was kind of walking us through that episode, he kind of made a point about how Coca-Cola is the symbol of America. And I don't know if I entirely agree with the reasoning that he put forward, but I like the Warhol quote that he brought up, that no matter how rich you are, how poor you are, you can't get a better bottle of Coke. That Coke is this like democratic equalizer. But it's less the Coke that I want to talk about, more the Marx, because talking about the Brechtian elements of the documentary filmmaking that's on display here, this section did something very on the nose that to me kind of falls apart upon itself. And I don't think it's bad that because it's on the nose. It's just kind of bad. I'm like, wait, what are you trying to say about this exactly? That we have Professor Cantor giving his lecture in the local university all about Brecht, or more so about Marx, and he kind of relates it to Brecht, but he's talking about the theory of alienation and labor, and the labor theory of value. And intercut in this is kind of a real Kuleshov effect going on, is the manual laborers of the theater production. We get like an extended sequence with the props guy and all the work he's putting into. George wanted a Jeep, so we have to figure out how to make, this Jeep work on stage, and like get an electric battery from a golf cart into it, and like, and then we go to the costume people and to all the hard work they're doing. And the documentary certainly doesn't show these people having a very good time. The props guy kind of says like, I don't know when I'm going to get a day off, and like, oh, I got to do this because George wants this. Like, and like, I think the point that it's trying to make is very clear. It's that the workers are alienated like from their labor, and they're, under these conditions. And this is what Marx was talking about, and by extension, what Brecht is talking about. And like, it feels so on the nose to me, but that kind of makes you think about like, well, what does this say about the Brecht production that the rest of this is celebrating? That is it not still itself a kind of capitalistic hierarchy that exploits its workers? Is that the point that we're trying to make here? I don't know if you had thoughts about this whole little episode in there.
Yeah, it's weird you say that because I one thing that really stuck with me is when Cantor at the end of the documentary states right out that Brecht learned from Marx, but his pieces weren't. How did he say it? Or like his
I didn't
pieces
write down the exact quote. It was something.
weren't embedded in Marxism though, or like he like blatantly said there was a dissonance between them.
Mm-hmm.
As uh and I'm glad he said that because I felt that way too. I was like,
Right.
yeah, I think he was influenced and he educated himself on it. And sure, I think it definitely in some of his other pieces, it's more apparent when you actually have like characters named Worker One or whatever. It's more literally on the nose. But yeah, it's interesting. I didn't really go that. I didn't even.
Yeah. Well, that
think
to
of.
me, it seemed like that's what the filmmaking is, the story the filmmaking is trying to tell here. It's that, look, listen to this lecture on Marx and the exploitation of workers under capital. And then it's
Yeah.
showing the theater workers who are, don't
How
know when
dare
they're going to
you.
get time off. And the tyrannical
Yeah.
George C. Wolfe is making them
But
do all
but
this
I'm
stuff.
wondering just to kind of throw an optimistic view on it,
Yeah.
maybe, right?
And
Or I'm wondering if that it's again to say that is work. Like this isn't just this fantastical art.
Mhm.
Art is not this fantastical, whimsical, take me back into time, do that quick costume change, and tell the story with elegant costumes. Like it's fucking hard. Sorry, that's my second time
It's
I've
okay.
sworn.
Our rating on this
But
one.
no, from a career point of view, being an artist is hard. It is hard work because it is physical and mental and emotional all at one time at weird ass hours and sometimes with little to no pay or and so and I think that's another reason why I like the fact that Brecht's pieces aren't. It's not the spectacle that we're worried about. It's like the message.
Yeah. Like, I don't think
And
you're wrong about this kind of reading of it. I think, like, yeah, and I it just, to me, it seemed like the film was trying to make the point that due to these labor conditions, the act of producing a Brecht play does not live up to the ideals that a Brecht play propagates, which I think
yeah,
is like, and it's interesting. Like, I think because yeah, there is this undercurrent of the tyranny of the director, and you got to do what he says and what he wants, and like and that it is an unjust hierarchy in this way, and perhaps the only true Brecht production that lives up to the Brechtian ideal is one that is completely hierarchyless. And
I never read when they would pepper in those comments of like this is what the director wants, or even when the costume designer was saying like his vision is to show soldiers of many different wars, right? Not just centered in one era. I was never under the impression that they were overworked or like had a negative connotation of the director.
okay, I would have to rewatch it now. I think to me
Yeah,
that
like I
felt very
think
palpable
because
in
I
it.
think another great thing, for example, with the props individual, which his name is escaping me,
Yeah,
I
I didn't write it
apologize,
down.
but
Apologies.
he started out his whole snippet of him saying as his like thesis project he did it on Mother Courage. So he's excited to like he said he like he working on it. It's gonna be interesting. I have to like separate my ideals or like what my vision from the director's. And then similar to the costume designer, she herself said he wants me to do various different soldier-esque, so I have all these books and all these things, and it never was like he gave me all these books to look through, or even with the props guy, like he is putting it into my brain that this is to me they were stronger in a sense of like they put that work upon themselves. Like
Yeah.
like she had her whole thing full of like different catalogs and different like starting from the ground up with some of their images, and like that's her doing. And even with the props guy, like his whole idea of the golf course, like I guess a positive way of looking at it is like the hard work that they're doing is their choice.
Yeah, it's a labor of love, you could argue.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I now I'm really want to go back and rewatch that scene in
Yeah.
particular, because to me it felt very strongly pessimistic. I think, like, in the framing. I'm not even saying that's how the workers themselves felt about it, but through the selection of footage and the intercutting it with the lecture on alienated labor, like, I did think
Yeah.
it kind of,
Yeah.
it
Yeah. It
seemed
kind
like
of
the
connotates
director,
it to be,
yeah,
yeah.
the director, John Walter wanted, or yeah, seemed to want us to be drawing these connections, whether or not that's how the individual, like,
Yeah.
laborers feel about it. But if my original reading is at least a little correct, and perhaps the workers weren't necessarily, like, very thrilled about, like, a lot of the conditions of, how their
Mm-hmm.
work was treated and operated and came about, like, in there. That's kind of an interesting sly critique to slide into this otherwise very positive like documentary about, like, and it's almost like a master's tools master's house sort of scenario, where you do kind of have to think about, in, like, I don't imagine this was like a yeah, this probably was like a big, it's Broadway, it's big commercial theater, like, the the owning class still does exploit the labor of the workers in order to create this, and definitely does make more money than their workers do. And you kind of do have to think about, I'm not saying like George C. Wolfe or Tony Kushner in particular are the ones who are doing this, but they are kind of maybe middle managers to the investors or the producers who
Right.
do kind of make. And I think there is a worthwhile critique to kind of dig into there about how uh, the capitalistic infrastructure of Broadway puts on a Brecht play, shows its, virtue signaling, if you want to use a very contemporary term here, but doesn't actually practice what it's preach. And the labor that is required to bring this production into fruition is very much, a mechanism of that system that continues to perpetuate it in this way. And perhaps commercial Broadway theater is designed to prevent that type of progress from coming forward, or breaking its chains, to use a Marxist term.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, I just thought that was interesting, and I didn't know
No,
how I
yeah,
felt
that's
about it while
lovely.
watching it, and I could be completely misreading it, like, to some of your kind of counter arguments.
No, but I think honestly that's a lovely way of both of us took that moment and were impacted differently.
Yeah,
But yet we were still impacted and those moments were tattooed on our brains.
very
That's
much so.
Brecht.
Yeah,
Like the
that's
audience member you're sitting
yeah.
next to is not going to have the same experiences
Mm-hmm.
of as you are having.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a pretty apt note to end on. That's
I love that.
Brecht.
Yes.
Thank you, Jill, so much for joining me for this discussion. I know if I ever
Thanks
want
for
to talk
having
about
me.
Brecht, you are obviously my go-to person for that. Um,
Indeed.
before we go, you want to plug your socials?
Sure, yes. I am on Instagram. My artist account is jillian.robinson96. There you will see posts with some upcoming projects. I am going to be stage managing an audio drama of Venice Preserved, which is the most renowned restoration tragedy, with Sweet Tea Shakespeare. So we start that at the end of the month. So keep your eyes peeled for marketing materials with that. And then, yeah, I've been doing some musical duet covers to kind of keep the pipe in use. So yes, you can catch all that jazz on my page. Ryan, do you want to share any of your handles
Well,
or your usual spiel?
you can't find me on social media, or you can. Don't send me friend requests if I don't know you personally. So you could just send all that love to Cup of Hemlock Theatre. Hey, that's the brand. We are a mechanism of capitalism, even though we preach high ideals. So yeah. Treat your workers fairly, I guess.
Yeah.
Jill, once again, thank you so much for joining me. We'll put a link to a place in the description where you audience can view Theater of War, the 2008 documentary on this production of Mother Courage. And I
Yeah.
hope you enjoy it, and then come back here and tell us what you thought about it.
because you will be thinking. It
Oh,
will
you're
get you
definitely
to
gonna,
think.
it will get you to think. And we want
Yeah.
to hear those thoughts.
Yes.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Great.
Take
Cheers,
care.
everyone. Stay safe.
Cheers. Bye-bye.